For centuries, Raphael's painting was held to be the most complete expression of the values of the Italian Renaissance. While his older contemporaries sought to reproduce nature, Raphael sought nurture and an idealized vision of the world. He was a sensualist whose work was graceful and harmonious, and which for many in his world came closest to visual perfection. Raffaello Santi was born in 1483 in Urbino in central Italy. Though a small provincial town, Urbino had a sound artistic pedigree. Raphael's father was himself a respected artist and poet, with close ties to the intellectual circles of the prestigious Urbino court. This is a drawing widely believed to be by Raphael, a self-portrait when barely an adolescent. His precocious talents were no doubt stimulated by his father's profession, as well as the vitality of his courtly surroundings. But Raphael's privileged childhood came to an end very rapidly, when within the space of 3 years both his parents died, and by the age of 11 he was an orphan. A year later, in 1495, he came here, to Perugia, then a bustling, vibrant centre, and Raphael had one aim: to establish himself as a painter. Now, we don't know that much about the early time in Perugia, but what we do know is that he soon became apprenticed in the workshop of one Pietro Perugino, the leading painter in the area, known for his pious, gentle, popular religious paintings. By all accounts, Raphael was a quick learner, and by the age of 17, he was already referred to as a master on the contract for a big commission. Raphael's mastery of the art of painting when he was barely out of his teens is brilliantly exemplified in this picture. Now, there were plenty of young men of 17 or 18 who'd been deemed to have mastered their craft, but this kind of talent stood out supreme, and it was immediately acknowledged. Raphael was commissioned by a group of nuns in the convent of St. Antonio in Perugia to do an altarpiece, and this was the result. What we see are the Virgin Mary and the infant Jesus surrounded by saints. We see the two great male pillars of Christianity, aside from Christ himself, St. Peter on the left, St. Paul on the right. We then see two of the early Christian martyrs, St. Catherine from Alexandria, she was martyred in the 4th century AD, and then to the right of the Virgin Mary, St. Cecilia, a Roman martyr from the 2nd or 3rd century. But everything is central in this composition. Everything focuses in on the Virgin Mary herself, clutching the infant Jesus, with St. John the Baptist there, and there's a triangle of ascension, if you like, from John the Baptist to Jesus himself, to the Virgin Mary, who is enthroned supreme in this image, and the halo on the Virgin Mary's head is amplified, if you like, by this canopy above her, and the whole emphasis is on upwards, on ascension. The way it's painted is colourful, strong, confident. You can see a mixture of tempera on this wooden surface, but also all the saints have inlaid gold halos that amplify their own status. But there's something else happening in this picture, and really you can see with the contrast of the upper portion and the lower. In the upper portion, that's the style Raphael has learnt from his teacher Perugino. But down here, in this decisiveness and in this confidence, there's a new style afoot. Despite his already precocious success in Perugia, Raphael harboured greater ambitions and recognised the need to improve his technique still further. And where better to turn than the city at the forefront of the Renaissance, Florence. Towards the end of 1504, at the age of 21, Raphael arrived here with a letter of introduction from the court of Urbino to Florence's chief magistrate. Walking into the Piazza della Signoria, he saw Michelangelo's recently erected colossal statue of David. Florence's artistic culture was dominated by the towering figures of Michelangelo and Leonardo. They just unveiled their latest creations, which were causing little short of a sensation in the city.
These were full-scale drawings for murals destined to be frescoed onto the walls of Florence's seat of government. Raphael learnt numerous lessons from these older masters. In this painting from 1507, we can see how he perfected the sfumato technique pioneered by Leonardo. This involved the use of extremely fine, soft shading to outline forms and features, thereby adding greater realism and fluidity to an image. From Michelangelo, Raphael absorbed the expressive possibilities of the human anatomy in art, shown most vividly in this large painting, The Entombment of Christ. Instead of producing a traditionally static image of grief, Raphael accentuates the drama of the scene by putting all the figures into motion. Raphael soon had more social opportunities than either of his older mentors. His courtly upbringing and his easy charm gave him access to the elite cultural circles of Florence, and he was quickly accepted. As a painter, however, he was still largely untested. He had to content himself with small-scale commissions, mostly of devotional works.
The development of Raphael's artistic style proceeded through his exploration of one subject above all others, the Madonna and Child. Now, it's hard to believe that this subject, which is so central to Western art, at the beginning of the Church's history for the first 6 centuries, was virtually non-existent. But then, and particularly in the Byzantine period, it moved centre stage in Western art, although invariably she was enthroned on high, triumphantly, and a rather remote figure. From the 14th century onwards, though, the relationship became much more intimate, and it's that in particular that Raphael picks up. Here we see Christ looking slightly gurgling, with his hand tucked into his mother's dress. Her hand comes up to meet his arm. They're very connected. And then Raphael takes the thing slightly wider. There, she's close-cropped and rather intimate. Here, no less intimate, but a landscape, classical and idealized, is there in the background with a classical building in shot. And then, triumphantly, I think we'd say, in this picture, circular frame called the tondi, we see the Madonna and Christ next to John the Baptist. The landscape's been broadened. It's even more beautiful, rather beautifully geometrically positioned as well. You can cut it in half along the riverway there. And the circle is the outside, but you also get this triangle or pediment again, and also there's a sense of a rectangle there. It's a geometric miracle going on here. Instead of being enthroned, as she has been in Byzantine art, here she's absolutely at one with nature. Instead of sitting on any kind of chair, she's slumped against an old tree root. A child sits in her lap, and John the Baptist, clad in his customary fur, is on the end. There's a nice relationship between the 3 figures, not least in the fact that John the Baptist is giving to Christ this stick, but of course it's more than a stick. It's a symbol of the cross on which Christ will eventually be crucified, and so the image looks forward. But there's a nice comparison between this painting and the Madonna and Child there that was painted 5 years before. That palette is bold, it's striking, and it's very much the palette of a Florentine artist. Here, though, his palette and his approach is softened. It's more subtle, and some would say it's more beautiful. Not just the contours, but the way everything is muted. And it's the idea that piety or devotion can be approached through the idea of beauty. But it's also the palette and approach of artists working in Rome. And when you notice that, in fact, and this is very rare for the Madonna, that she's clad in a turban, long flowing robes and sandals, and that this is a rather sentimentalized idea in the 16th century of what Romans would look like, you realize that Raphael's attentions have moved away from Florence, and he's taking on board a different way of approaching painting.
During his 4 years in Florence, Raphael painted 15 versions of the Madonna and Child. However, he knew that his prospects for grander work lay further south.
In 1508, Raphael left Florence for Rome, lured by the promise of work from the wealthy papacy of Julius II. Julius was trying to transform Rome into the new Florence, the Renaissance city. And he did this by a lavish series of decorative and architectural projects all over the city, but centred just over the Tiber here in the Vatican itself.
As Rome was dug up to make way for the great building projects of Pope Julius II, ever-increasing numbers of Roman sculptures were being discovered amongst the rubble. They were a source of inspiration to almost all the Renaissance artists. One of the most astonishing discoveries made 25 years earlier, but now only fully being seen, was a vast underground network of rooms, baths and hallways, the ruins of a gigantic luxury palace belonging to the infamous Roman Emperor Nero. Like many fellow artists, Raphael made his perilous way down into the ruins with a candle, little knowing what to expect. What he found were intricate and supremely well-drawn paintings covering every wall and ceiling. Behind astonishing sculptures lurking in the darkness were some very sensual scenes. It was a total revelation to Raphael and would inspire him when he came to devise his own decorative schemes.
Raphael was quickly able to find work decorating a suite of rooms in the Vatican with a group of other artists, but catching the eye of Julius II enough to make sure he was made a salaried papal painter.
While Michelangelo was painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, in the same building the 26-year-old Raphael landed the job of decorating the Stanza della Segnatura, a library where the Pope signed and sealed documents. In scale and scope, the project pushed all Raphael's skills to the limit. The idea for the decoration was to illustrate 4 of the standard classifications of the Renaissance library: theology, poetry, philosophy and law. The most admired of Raphael's creations was this fresco, called the School of Athens, which in many ways encapsulates the aspirations of the Renaissance, man's rational quest for truth. It's a stunning composition, carefully constructed, where at the centre, just where the perspective converges, are Plato and Aristotle, the grand old men of Greek philosophy, arguing about the nature of truth. Raphael cleverly sums up their complex thoughts with simple gestures, Plato pointing upwards to the idealized world, and Aristotle pointing downwards to the world that he inhabits. Our interest is kept alive with lots of playful touches. In one corner, the mathematician Pythagoras writes down his theories, while simultaneously they're being stolen by the people just behind him. But it's not just thinkers that Raphael extols in his mural. Artists are also put in prominent roles. Plato is given the features of Leonardo. The brooding figure sitting on the steps has the face of Michelangelo. And then, staring out at us from the corner of the painting, is Raphael himself. Raphael went on to decorate many more of the papal apartments in the Vatican. By 1512, he'd emerged as the main rival to the divine Michelangelo in Rome. Not yet 30, Raphael was now running a successful workshop in Rome. He was renowned